So I'll actually call this tasks. So what we need to do now is we need a way to pass this set tasks function down into our task input, so that through task input we can give that function our current task state, the task that the user has just typed into our input field, and then pass it back up so that we can update our app state. So what we'll do here is we'll set a new method and we'll call it handle submit, as we'll be submitting the form in our task input. And what that will do is that will take the task that the user has just inserted into our task input field. So that will be an arrow function. And then what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to set tasks. So using our useState function, we're going to set that to a new array, and we're going to want to spread in the tasks that are already in our tasks state, and then we're going to want to add on the new task that the user has just given us. And then if we save that, we then want to pass that into our task input component. So we can call that onSubmit. And all we're going to do is pass a reference to the handle submit function that we've just created. So now if we jump back over into our task input, what we can do now is we can destructure that onSubmit function that we've just passed into our component from the props. So we'll destructure that, call it onSubmit. And like we did in our task component, we want to make sure that we set our prop types. So we can import prop types from the prop types package, and then just below our component we can say task input.prop types, making sure to leave the p as a lowercase p, and that is going to be an object, and we only have one prop, so that will be the onSubmit, and what that's going to be is it's going to be a prop type, and it's a function, but seeing as function is a reserved word, using the prop types package, we need to just call it func, and then that will always be required in this component when using this component. So when the user submits this form, we need to take the new task value and pass it to our onSubmit prop, which has been passed down from our app.js component. So we'll set up the onSubmit event listener, and what that will do is we want to take the value of the form, and we'll call that e, and then we'll set up a new method called handle submit, passing in e. So if we define that method now, const handle submit, it's going to be an arrow function, and we're taking the e value, which all we need to do with is prevent default for the form. So what prevent default will do is, on a traditional HTML form, when you hit submit, it will trigger a page refresh essentially. But we don't want that to happen here, as we're going to handle the form submission ourselves. So as we said previously, our task list will be an array of task objects which have an ID and a task body. So currently we just have the task as a string, so we need to prep that so that we're handing off an object with the ID and the body of the task. So what we'll do is, if this handle submit method is called and task isn't empty, so we don't want to be adding empty tasks to our task list. So if task is not equal to an empty string, we want to first create the ID. So all the IDs need to be unique So there are a couple of ways you can do this. I'm going to use the current date string, which should more or less guarantee that we have unique IDs in each of our tasks. You can make this as complicated, as complex as you like, but for just this simple application, I know I'm not going to be spamming the task every second, the task list every second, so I'm happy to just use the current date as a string value. So our ID is just going to be a string version of the date.now. And then what we need is to construct our task object, and that is going to be an object, and we are going to set the ID. Seeing as our ID key is the same as our ID constant that we're setting it to, we can just omit the name of our constant or the value, so we can just use just ID, and that will be the key and the value of ID. And then we want to set our body to our task, which is the task in our state. All we need to do from there is to call our onSubmit function, which was passed down to us from our app component, and we just want to give that our task object. And then, as we said previously, the reason that we want to control the value of this task is once a user has submitted a new task, we want to clear that input field. So all we'll do is set task, which is the set task given to us from the useState hook, and we just want to set that back to an empty string. So to test this, we can go back into our app, and in our handle submit, rather than setting task, what we can do is we can just console log our task, which was just passed to us, and save. So if I type in task 10, hit enter, you'll see that we've now logged an object with a unique ID and the body of our new task. So that's all the functionality needed in our task input. So we can close that out along with the task input styles. And now back in our app, we can actually see our new task being added to the list in action. So we can remove our console log and uncomment our set tasks. That will re-render our app. And if we add a new task, task 5, you'll see that it's added to our list. So right now, if we refresh, it's not persisted. And that's some functionality that we'll put in later. What I'd like to do first is to actually handle the functionality of when we click on each of our tasks, it removes them from our task list. So how we'll do that is we'll set up a method in our app component, and we'll call that handle remove task, and we'll be passing this method down into our task list so that we can listen for a click event on each of our tasks and fire off this handle remove task method. So what we'll be handing our method is just the ID of the task that we want to remove. So this will be an arrow function, and all we really need to do is we want to call our set tasks, which was given to us by our useState hook. And all we want to do is pass that back our task list, but just without the object with the ID of the task ID that we provided for this method. So how we do that is we pass it our tasks, which is our tasks array, and we are going to want to use the array method filter. And what filter does is, if you pass it a function, so we'll pass that an arrow function, and that will essentially filter through all of the items in the array. So for each of the items in the array, we want to call each item our task, and then for each task, if the task ID is not equal to the ID that we are providing, then we can return that back to our task's state. So essentially it will loop through our array of objects, and for each task, if the task's ID is not equal to the ID of the task that we want to remove, it will return that back to us and keep that in our task's state. But then if it is equal to the ID of the task that we want to remove, it won't return that back and therefore won't be returned to our state. So we then want to pass this method down as props to our task list component. So we will pass it in as a prop called handle remove task, which is the same name as the method, and we're going to pass it our method, just the reference to the method. So then if we go over to our task list, we are already utilizing prop types. So I just want to destructure from props our new handle remove task function, and we're going to add that to our prop types, which is going to be prop types, and it's a func, and that is required when using this component. We then want to pass our function down one more level to our task component. If this was a bigger application, you may want to structure this differently, so you might be using Redux for state management, so that rather than prop drilling, which is the idea of passing props down more than one component level, you could use something like Redux and then call a Redux action when wanting to call these methods in child components further down your component tree. But seeing as this is just a simple app, I'm happy to pass the props down a couple of levels, but again, you may want a better state management system on larger scale applications. So all we're going to do is to pass this down again. So we're going to use the same prop name, and we're just going to pass our handle remove task function down into our task component. So in our task component, we can then accept the new function as props, and we haven't set up prop types here, so I'm going to import prop types from prop types. That has a hyphen, and then we'll set the task.prop types to an object to which we have a task, which is a prop types object, and that is required. And then we also have the handle remove task, which is a prop types dot function, and that also is required. So what we'll do is we will set up a new method, and we'll call that handle click. And all we are going to do with that is it's an arrow function, and we will just simply call the handle remove task and pass it the ID that we destructured off of the task prop, which we got from our task list when rendering out this task component. So then simply need to set up the onClick event listener. So when we click it, we just need a reference to this onClick, and then that should all work. So there you go, you can see that it's removing our tasks when we click them. So all that's really left to do is to persist our tasks, as right now we have some initial tasks, and whenever we type in a new task, it persists for this session of our app, but then when we refresh, it removes that. So we want to persist our new tasks in local storage. So if we close out our task and our task list components, how we can do that is, first let's initialize our tasks list with no tasks. So we start from scratch, so we can add task 1, task 2, task 3. So on refresh, that still won't persist. So then what we need to do is to find a way to package these up so that we can store them in local storage. So local storage doesn't allow you to store arrays or objects or anything like that. It only stores strings. So we need a way to convert our tasks array to a string. So what we can do is, on our handle submit, this is where, when updating our state, we also want to update the version of our tasks in our local storage. So how we do that is local storage. We want to set item, and that item is going to be called tasks. And then, as we mentioned, we can't just pass tasks like this, so we want to stringify our array. So we can use the JSON.stringify method. So then we want to pass it the same array that we are passing our set tasks function. So what we can do is we can, rather than creating that array within that function call, what we can do is we can set that to a constant of new tasks, and we'll set that to that new array, and then we'll pass that into both of these functions. And then when we save that, if we go over to application in our console and then go to local storage, you'll see that there's nothing there now. But if I add a new task, you'll see that we're now persisting that task in our local storage, and you can see that it's got one item in it with our ID and our task body. But what you'll notice is on refresh, it's still not persisted, so we need to handle that functionality now. So how we make sure that we are initializing our state with our previous session's tasks is, rather than initializing it with just an empty array, first we can check whether our local storage has any tasks in it. So what we can do is we can use the JSON.pass, and we are going to pass the local storage, and we want to get the item called tasks. So first time using this app, this will be nothing. So if there is nothing, we can just set that to an empty array. And then, as you can just see there, our app refreshed and it saw that there was some tasks in the local storage. So it initialized our app with our task. So I can add task 2, task 3, and then when I refresh, they'll be persisted. So you'll notice that we can persist our tasks, but when we click to remove a task, when we refresh, it's still in our local storage. So we need to handle that functionality. So that functionality will go in the handle remove task method. So what we'll do is local storage, we want to reset our tasks items. So we want to find tasks or set tasks, and then we want that to be much like we did here. So JSON, we want to stringify our task list, and we essentially want this this section of code here. So what we'll do is we'll remove that and we'll set that to our new task list. And then we'll pass our new tasks constant, which will be an array, into both of these function calls. And then when we save that, you'll see that if I remove task 3, it's removed it from this current session, but then also when we refresh, it's removed it from our local storage as well. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed that short tutorial on how I would go about building a simple task management app which uses functional components and the useState React hook. We're also implementing local storage to persist our tasks, which I think is a nice way of persisting data on a small app if you don't want to use a database and it's just an application that you'll be using, or that you don't need to share data between users. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. And if you're stuck and need to have a look at the code, you can go to the GitHub repo, which I'll leave in the description below. If you have any other suggestions on simple apps that you would like to see how I'd go about building, please leave any ideas in the comments below and I'll be happy to explore those and create a few more tutorials for you. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.